What began as a quiet personal decision behind closed palace doors has now exploded into a seismic royal scandal. Just 1 minute ago, Prince William received DNA results that have thrown the entire foundation of the British monarchy into question. The truth hidden for decades, buried beneath royal protocol and generational secrecy, is now exposed, and the consequences are irreversible. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. For years, Prince William carried the weight of destiny like a crown already pressing against his skull. He was born into certainty, raised within a system that never encouraged questions, only obedience. Yet behind the carefully managed smiles and rehearsed appearances, something had begun to unsettle him. A whisper, a doubt, a feeling that the story he had been given since childhood was missing a page. What started as a private curiosity soon became a quiet obsession, one he never shared with advisors, never voiced to the public, and barely admitted even to himself. When he finally made the decision to seek scientific truth, it was not an act of rebellion. It was an act of survival. The emotional weight of that choice was crushing. To question one's origins is to question one's identity. To do so while standing in line to the throne is to risk detonating the very institution built around your blood. Those closest to William noticed the change before anyone else did. The long silences, the distant stares, the way his hand lingered over old photographs, particularly those of his mother. He wasn't just searching for answers, he was bracing himself for the possibility that everything he knew might collapse. Then the results came back. Quietly, clinically, with numbers and markers that could not be negotiated with tradition. Within hours, something shifted inside the palace. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, phones went unanswered, meetings were cancelled without explanation. Somewhere between sealed envelopes and encrypted messages, the information began to leak. Not to the public yet, but within the royal household itself. And once it began, it could not be contained. An immediate lockdown followed. Internal communications were restricted. Long-trusted staff were abruptly reassigned. The atmosphere thickened with fear and speculation. People who had served the crown their entire lives suddenly found themselves locked out of rooms they had entered freely for decades. Doors closed, voices lowered, eyes watched each other with new suspicion. The royal machine, built on continuity and control, was stalling under the weight of one truth it could not quietly absorb. At the center of it all was Catherine. Those near her later whispered that she broke down when she understood what the results truly implied, not only for her husband, but for their children and foe. A monarchy that had promised them stability. Her tears were not just for William, they were for the future that now looked terrifyingly uncertain, for the questions that would soon follow them everywhere, for the innocence that had been stripped away in a single moment. And as the shock rippled outward, something older surfaced. Murmurs of conversations long buried, glances exchanged years ago that suddenly carried new meaning. The first whispers of a cover-up dating back to Diana's lifetime began circulating through inner corridors, whispers that she had known, that she had feared, that she may have tried to protect her sons from a truth far more dangerous than any scandal the world thought it understood. But to truly understand the depth of this betrayal, we must go back to the origins of the secret that has haunted the Windsors for decades, buried in a private archive, and sealed with instructions not to be opened until William comes of age. Diana's final message was not just a farewell, it was a warning. A letter wrapped in grief, suspicion, and maternal foresight. What did Diana know that no one else dared speak aloud? The envelope was discovered almost by accident, tucked behind older royal correspondence in a rarely accessed section of the Windsor archives. The seal was unmistakable, Diana's personal crest, pressed into wax, untouched for decades. Royal archivists, following protocol, passed it quietly up the chain. When it finally reached William, now a man grappling with both duty and doubt, the timing felt almost divine. He opened it alone, and what he read didn't just whisper suspicion, it screamed of betrayal. Diana had written not just a mother's goodbye, but a prophecy. She spoke of truth buried beneath loyalty, of bloodlines manipulated, and most chillingly, of someone close but not blood, whose presence had been carefully protected by the firm. For William, the words were a lightning strike to his core. He read the letter multiple times, disbelli, Eving, angry, terrified. This wasn't speculation, it was a cry from beyond the grave. Diana's tone was not panicked, but precise, Her fears had clearly crystallized in her final months, sharpened by something she must have seen or heard. She didn't name names outright, but she described patterns, behavior, warnings. She urged William to be brave enough to ask the questions she had been punished for raising. Her final line etched itself into his soul. When you seek the truth, they will try to bury you in silence. Don't let them. Haunted by her words, William began to reflect on the many inconsistencies he had once dismissed. He thought back to childhood moments that suddenly glowed with strange new meaning, conversations interrupted when he entered the room, adults who grew stiff when his name was mentioned, the subtle difference in how some senior royals regarded him. One memory stood out, a tense exchange between Diana and a senior member of the household, the words "he has a right to" no echoing in his mind like a warning bell. The line about someone close but not blood lingered most. Who had Diana been referring to? Who within their tightly guarded circle had lived beneath a lie? William began mentally retracing the history of every confidant, every relative, every royal adjacent who had seemed out of place. And that's when the questions crystallized into something more dangerous: certainty. Not only did he need answers, he needed evidence. Still, he told no one, not even Catherine. To bring this into the open without proof would ignite a firestorm. So he chose silence, but a silence sharpened with purpose. He began pulling threads discreetly, tracing medical records, inquiring about old staff logs, quietly requesting a DNA test from a trusted source outside the royal medical household. He knew the risk. If anyone discovered his mission, the consequences could be catastrophic. But William wasn't just chasing the truth for himself. He was chasing it for his chill. Dren, for Diana, and for a crown that he feared had been corrupted long before he ever had the chance to wear it. And so began a silent investigation, one that would lead William down a path of revelation darker than he ever anticipated. Under the guise of routine health checks, William submitted a sample. No aides were told. No doctors from within the palace were involved. He wanted the truth and only the truth. But once the results returned, they didn't just question his identity, they obliterated it. It was an operation executed in shadows. Every detail of the test was arranged through a trusted friend outside royal jurisdiction, someone with no stake in the firm, no ties to the crown, and above all, no fear of what might be uncovered. The clinic selected was discreet, known for handling cases where secrecy outweighed status. William insisted on anonymity, even using a pseudonym. The stakes were too high. If word got out before results were in, the monarchy wouldn't have time to react. It would implode on suspicion alone. And so he waited, silently enduring the unbearable tension of everyday royal life, carrying on with handshakes, speeches, smiles, and formal dinners, all while knowing that a single envelope held the power to rewrite history. Every second ticked louder in his mind. The days felt eternal. But when the call finally came, confirming the test was complete, everything stilled. The document that arrived was sterile in form, but catastrophic in content. It wasn't vague, it wasn't unclear, it was precise, methodical, and devastating. The genetic analysis showed a break-clear, undeniable markers that revealed a biological mismatch. According to science, the man he had called father his entire life was not, in fact, his biological parent. In one brutal moment, the royal lineage collapsed in his mind. He was no longer the heir by blood. The story fed to the world, upheld by crowns and coronations, shattered into fragments. William didn't react outwardly. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. Instead, silence took him hostage. He read the results again and again, trying to find a crack in the certainty, trying to prove the impossible. But the truth stared back, cold and unfeeling. This wasn't just about paternity, it was about legacy, about truth, about betrayal not just from one man but from an entire institution that had knowingly or unknowingly built a future on a lie. And in that silence, something inside William shifted forever. The boy who had once walked behind his mother's coffin was now a man walking through the ruins of his own identity, yet he told no one. Not immediately. He knew this wasn't just personal, this was national, this was global. He had to move carefully, strategically. Every decision from this point forward would either protect the monarchy or expose it to destruction. His mind raced with possibilities. Was it a mistake? A switch? A lie crafted to protect the crown from scandal decades ago. Who knew? Who had hidden tea? His. And why had his mother hinted at the truth but never confirmed it? The questions didn't stop, but the answers remained locked in silence. In the hours that followed, William sat alone with the truth. The palace was bustling, unaware of the seismic shift occurring in one of its royal apartments. Courtiers went about their routines. Security teams changed shifts. Catherine was busy with engagements. And yet, the future king sat staring at a report that made his entire life a contradiction. But even as he struggled to make sense of this new reality, something far more dangerous was quietly taking shape within the palace walls, because somewhere else, someone had sensed this reckoning long before it arrived. But while William tried to make sense of what this meant for him, a storm was already forming elsewhere, a storm Camilla had feared for years. As news of William's private investigation began to circulate, one woman's reaction stood out: Camilla, described by insiders as visibly shy, ken and demanding a private audience with the king. Her fear was not just of scandal, but of exposure. Camilla's reaction wasn't subtle. Within hours of quiet whispers echoing through the palace corridors, she was on the move, calling aides, cancelling public appearances, and pressing relentlessly to speak with William in private. But William, still processing the magnitude of the DNA revelation, refused every attempt. Not out of anger, but out of calculation. He knew any conversation before he understood the full scope could be weaponized. Camilla, however, wasn't simply worried about a media storm. Her panic stemmed from something deeper, something older, something that had been lying dormant since the final years of Diana's life. Her movements betrayed a woman not blindsided by revelation, but terrified that the past she thought was buried had begun to dig its way out. What happened next unfolded behind locked doors. Camilla cornered Charles in his private study, the confrontation over, heard only in fragments by those outside. Raised voices, shaky silences. One source claimed Camilla said the words, "You promised this would never come back." Whatever was said between them wasn't shared with even their most trusted advisors. But Charles's demeanor reportedly changed after that meeting, stern, distant, and unusually quiet in subsequent audiences. The king, once calm in crisis, now carried the look of a man realizing the walls were closing in faster than anyone anticipated. Whispers began emerging from within the royal household. Whispers that Diana, in her final months, had privately confronted Camilla about matters far more damning than infidelity. Rumors suggested that Diana had warned Camilla about bloodlines being manipulated, and about a truth that would one day destroy the illusion they built. At the time, these claims were dismissed as emotional outbursts from a woman deeply wounded. But now, in the wake of William's test, those same words felt prophetic. If Diana wasn't simply angry, what if she was right? Camilla's inner circle sprang into crisis mode. Longtime aides were seen shredding files, deleting digital archives, and urging loyalty pledges from staff, some of whom had served in both Diana's and Charles's time. Certain names were suddenly removed from duty rosters. Former household members received legal notices disguised as courtesy warnings. The Crown's machinery wasn't just protecting tradition, it was fighting to erase any trace of a deception that could shatter its future. And as Camilla clung to control, many began to question if this very secret had been the true fracture point between Diana and Charles all along. Was this the hidden betrayal that finally pushed their marriage past the brink? As tensions in the palace reached a boiling point, another bombshell was quietly brewing, this time from Prince Harry. What if William wasn't the only one with questions? In a shocking twist, Prince Harry had already taken his own DNA test years ago, and the results, kept hidden in Montecito, might explain why he chose exile over loyalty. Long before the world watched Harry and Meghan walk away from royal life, there had already been an unspoken fracture, a quiet attachment that ran far deeper than protocol or public duty. After the couple's explosive interview and eventual departure, many assumed the motives were rooted in media abuse or institutional rigidity, but behind the headlines, in the shadows of their private California life, another secret was quietly buried, one Harry had carried alone for years. According to sources close to the couple, shortly after their relocation, Harry, struggling with identity and familial disillusionment, ordered his own DNA test. At Megan's urging, and amid therapy sessions that peeled back layers of suppressed trauma, the decision was made. What he discovered would not just unsettle him, it would isolate him even further from the institution that had defined his entire life, the Rezu. LTS didn't align with what he had been told. There were anomalies, genetic gaps that raised more questions than answers. It wasn't just about paternity, it was about lineage, the cracks in a foundation he was raised to never question. Megan reportedly pushed for openness, suggesting they come forward, clear the air, use the truth to finally hold the monarchy accountable. But Harry refused. His loyalty to William, despite all the rifts, still held him hostage. "I won't be the one to break him," he allegedly told a confidant. That choice silence over disclosure began a new chapter in Harry's life. One of distance, not just from the royals, but from his brother. Still, the silence couldn't last forever. In a rarely discussed phone call between the two brothers months before the DNA results shook William's world, Harry reportedly hinted that not everything was as it seemed. The conversation, emotionally charged and fragmented, left William unsettled but unsure of what to make of it. "Everything will make sense someday," Harry had said before ending the call. At the time, it felt like an ominous riddle. Now, in hindsight, it reads like a warning. And just days before William's world imploded with his own DNA revelations, a courier arrived at Kensington Palace. No insignia, no prior warning. The package, addressed only to William in Harry's handwriting, was said to contain documents, timelines, and one photo, the kind that doesn't just tell a story, but confirms it. Whatever Harry had kept hidden in Montecito, he was now ready to share. But not through the press, not through scandal, through blood. This wasn't a coordinated attack. It was a bridge, shaky, raw, uncertain, a younger brother extending a truth he had once protected, hoping to spare the elder the agony he had already lived through. But it also revealed something far more chilling, that both brothers had been wandering in parallel through a maze of deception, never realizing they were tracing the same map. But before William could confront his father, someone else stepped in, an unexpected royal who had quietly watched from the shadows. Princess Anne, the no-nonsense royal known for loyalty to the institution, made her move. But this time, it wasn't to protect the firm. It was to protect the truth. And her message to William could either destroy or redeem the monarchy. The call came in quietly. No aides, no advisors. Just Anne's voice, steady and restrained, requesting a private meeting with William at Windsor. He agreed without hesitation. Of all the royals, Anne had always been different, blunt but wise, distant yet somehow always watching. She never involved herself in scandals or maneuvered for power. She had no interest in titles or tabloids. But in moments of crisis, Anne's silence spoke louder than speeches. When William opened the door that day, he saw not just an aunt, but a guardian of something sacred, something ancient, and now something shaken to its very foundation. Anne wasted no time. Me with pleasantries. She sat across from William, her hands clasped, her words measured. Then came her confession. She had suspected for years since the final chaotic months of Diana's life. There had been signs, she said, not just whispers but subtle inconsistencies, gaps in behavior, offhand remarks made by staff who were later dismissed. Diana, she admitted, had come to her once. Not to share the full truth, but to ask a question. If something were wrong with William's birthright, would you still stand by him? At the time, Anne didn't know what to make of it. She assumed it was emotional distress. But now, in the wake of William's revelation, those words struck like a thunderclap. Anne's voice grew lower as she leaned in, offering William something the rest of the palace had denied him, understanding. "We've protected the throne, not the truth," she said, her voice unwavering. "And that mistake is now ours to fix. It wasn't just a moment of reckoning. It was a passing of the two." RCH. Anne didn't offer him strategies or spin. She offered him a path forward, one rooted not in preservation, but in transformation. She urged him not to dismantle the institution in anger, but to reshape it with courage. The monarchy had long demanded silence. Now it required a voice, his voice. But she wasn't naive. Anne knew the backlash would be swift, the press merciless, the inner circle divided. That's why she had a plan. She revealed that months earlier she had quietly begun documenting certain royal decisions, sealed memos, handwritten letters from Diana, even transcripts of private conversations that had never reached public ears. She had kept them not to expose the family, but to protect the line of succession from ever being built on a lie again. Now she offered those to William not as a weapon, but as a foundation for something new, a monarchy not built on illusions but on legacy and truth. As she stood to leave, she placed one final thought in his hands. If you destroy them, they'll make you a villain. But if you lead them, William, they'll follow you into the future. It wasn't just advice, it was a challenge, one that only a true heir could answer with action, not fear. And just as Anne laid her cards on the table, King Charles made a move no one expected, one driven not by duty but by desperation. In a dimly lit room with no staff present, King Charles looked his son in the eye and whispered a truth long buried, a secret that had haunted him for decades, and for the first time the King of England appeared not regal but broken. The confrontation was inevitable. After weeks of whispers, avoidance, and unanswered questions, William asked to see his father alone, no aides, no titles, no scripts, just father and son face to face. What followed was not an argument nor a denial. It was a surrender. Charles, shoulders slumped under the crushing weight of decades-old regret, confessed the one thing he had never dared put into words. There had been doubt. Long ago. Even before Diana's death, there had been moments, glances, timelines, expressions on Diana's face that had stirred quiet questions he chose to bury. Questions about William's conception. Questions that, had they been spoken aloud, could have cracked the monarchy in half before it ever crowned him king. He admitted he had known something was off, but convinced himself it was imagination. That Diana's secrets were hers alone, and that love, or duty, or simply silence would preserve the illusion. I never asked because I didn't want to know, Charles said, his voice barely above a whisper. Because if I knew, I couldn't pretend. And if I couldn't pretend, I couldn't protect the crown. It wasn't just a confession, it was a collapse. The man who had worn the crown with stoicism and tradition now stood exposed, haunted by the ghost of a wife he had failed, a truth he had fled from, and a son he had raised with love wrapped in hesitation. For William, it was not anger that surged, it was sorrow. All those years, all the friction, all the unspoken strain between father and son now seemed tragically explained. Charles hadn't rejected him. He had feared him, or rather, feared the truth he represented. And in protecting the monarchy, he had wounded the very children it depended on. The room filled not with accusations, but with the ache of what had never been said, the moments lost, the bonds weakened by silence. Charles, in his final plea, didn't ask for forgiveness, he asked for preservation. Whatever happens, he said, don't destroy the institution, it's bigger than both of us. But William, now standing in full command of the truth, did not flinch. He responded with the clarity of a man transformed by revelation. The truth is the institution now, he said. If we hide this, we don't deserve the crown, and if we reveal it, we might finally make it worth wearing. It wasn't defiance, it was conviction. A moment that redefined power, not as something inherited, but something earned through honesty. In that instant, the roles reversed. The king stood as a man, and the son, finally, stood as a leader. But even as father and son stood in the ruins of their reality, the world outside was catching wind and preparing for fallout. Within minutes, headlines exploded. Royal bloodline in question. Parliament called emergency meetings. The church sought clarification. The world's most famous family was now the world's most scrutinized. And at the center, William, torn between title and truth. The leak hit like a missile. What had remained tightly held behind stone walls and encrypted files was suddenly plastered across screens and front pages across the globe. The private DNA report, redacted but unmistakable, was now public knowledge. News anchors, analysts, and royal commentators couldn't speak fast enough to match the flood of speculation. The name Prince William no longer echoed with certainty. It now echoed with suspicion, betrayal, and endless questions. The monarchy, once an immovable pillar of tradition, was now shaking violently beneath the weight of an unprecedented revelation. The fallout was instantaneous, brutal, and far from contained. In Westminster, the Prime Minister was blindsided. Forced into emergency briefings, he stood before Parliament to field furious demands from across the political spectrum. Was the succession still valid? Was the crown legally compromised? Were other royals involved? What if the bloodline breach reached back further than William? As ministers sparred in historic chambers, another front was opening in the streets. The public. Protests erupted across London, some demanding abdication, others demanding modernization. Royalists clung to faith, insisting lineage meant less than leadership. But the critics were louder. For them, this was a final crack in an already fragile illusion. The monarchy, they argued, was outdated and now possibly fraudulent. Inside the palace, chaos consumed every corridor. Courtiers scrambled to contain the narrative, each leak deepening the panic. Advisors drafted emergency contingency plans. Alternate lines of succession were considered. Meetings stretched deep into the night. Nothing could be ruled out, not even a complete collapse of the firm's structure. Contingency briefings that had once been theoretical were now disturbingly relevant. Discussions once reserved for doomsday scenarios had become the day's agenda, all while the eyes of the world remained glued to Buckingham Palace, watching a centuries-old institution publicly unravel in real time. And in the middle of this maelstrom stood Catherine, silent but unwavering. While William was thrust into the storm's eye, she became the anchor. Her presence, elegant, calm, and composed, spoke louder than any statement. Though she had been blindsided by the truth like everyone else, she stood by William with a poise that stunned even their fiercest critics. Behind closed doors, she advised restraint, focus, and integrity. She reminded him not of the burden of royalty but of its opportunity, and in doing so she became not just his support but his compass. Yet William knew time was running out. Every hour brought new pressure. Every headline tightened the noose. The world wanted a statement, a stance, a direction. And whatever he said next would shape not only the monarchy, but history itself. This wasn't about saving a name. It was about saving a future. And as the crown trembled in his hands, William understood the decision he was about to make would either restore faith or extinguish it completely. But in the eye of the storm, William made his final decision, a move that would alter history forever. He stepped onto the podium, not as a prince clinging to a title, but as a man reclaiming truth. With his voice steady, his gaze unwavering, and Catherine by his side, Prince William redefined what royalty means in the modern age. The truth didn't destroy him, it forged him anew. The crowd was silent, breath held in collective anticipation as William took his place before the world. Cameras flashed, reporters leaned in. But William didn't flinch. There was no scripted rhetoric, no palatial charm, no diversion, just truth raw, resolute and irreversible. He began not with blame, but with acknowledgement. Yes, the DNA revelations were true. Yes, they changed the story his family had held for generations. But, he declared, they would not define the man he was or the future he intended to build. He did not shrink from the scandal. He stood in it, owned it, and from within it carved a new path forward. He made it clear he would not abdicate, but he would not rule the way others had before him. The crown I carry is not made of gold, he said, but of accountability. With those words, the monarchy shifted. No longer was it a sanctuary for silence or secrets. William's leadership would be rooted in transparency and trust. He pledged to rebuild faith not through heritage but through action, a commitment not to perfection but to truth. His voice cracked just slightly when he spoke of Diana. My mother once told me the truth could be dangerous, he said, but she never told me it wasn't worth it. Then he spoke of the future, of George, Charlotte, and Louis. He promised to raise them not as heirs to a lie, but as children of clarity. Their legacy will not be titles, he said. It will be truth. That will be their crown. The line sparked thunderous applause across the square, and more surprisingly, across the globe. Messages poured in from heads of state, religious leaders, and ordinary citizens. Not everyone agreed with monarchy, but many agreed with courage, and William had shown more of it in one speech than the crown had in decades. As the address ended, he reached for Catherine's hand. They didn't bow, they didn't wave, they simply walked forward, side by side, not away from the wreckage, but through it. Behind them stood an old world, frayed by secrecy. Ahead of them, a new vision, uncertain but honest. And in that moment, the monarchy was no longer just a relic of history. It had become a story of redemption. In a monarchy built on blood, it was truth, not DNA, that would shape the future. And nothing would ever be the same again. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.